The alarm on my flagship screams before my eyes are even open, and I know something is wrong before I know what it is. I am Vela Kor, first daughter of the Kor line, and I have never once in my life been woken by an alarm that was not a drill. My chamber lights flare to full brightness in half a second, and my aide, a thin nervous man named Doran Thex, is already at my door with his hands shaking. "Princess," he says, "a ship has entered the neutral station. It did not signal, it did not ask permission, it is simply there." I sit up so fast the blood rushes from my head. One ship, he says. Human. For a moment I almost laugh. My fleet numbers 41 warships, arranged in a formation that has broken 3 planetary defense grids without losing a single hull. We came to this station to remind the scattered human colonies who holds the leash in this sector, to make them sign the tribute agreement before winter cuts their supply lines. And now Doran is telling me that a single human ship has parked itself in our docking ring like it owns the place. Where did it come from? I ask, already pulling on my command sash. What class? What weapons signature? That is the problem, Doran says. We cannot get a weapons signature. Our scanners are reading it, but the ship is giving us nothing. No power spikes, no shield harmonics. It is either powered down completely, which would be suicide, or it is hiding something we have never seen before. I do not like either answer. I move through the corridor toward the bridge, and every officer I pass has the same look on their face, the look of people who have just watched a spider walk calmly into a room full of much larger animals, and felt, for the first time, unsure who should be afraid of whom. I do not let my own face show the same thing. A princess of the Kor line does not let her crew see her hesitate, not even for a heartbeat, not even when the universe hands her something it has never handed her before. On the bridge, the view screen shows it. The human ship is small compared to my flagship, sleek and dark, with no insignia I recognize, and no visible weapons ports at all. It sits in the docking ring at the center of the station, like a stone dropped into still water, and around it, the ripples have not stopped moving. Hail them, I say. Nothing happens for 3 long seconds. Then a voice answers, calm, almost bored, speaking our language with an accent that sounds like it was learned from a machine rather than a person. "This is Ethan Cole," the voice says. "I'm requesting a meeting with whoever is in charge of that fleet. Preferably today." The bridge goes silent. Not one ship of mine has fired. Not one demand has been made. And yet a single human, alone on an unarmed-looking vessel, in the middle of my war fleet, has just spoken to me the way a merchant speaks to a customer who is wasting his time. I feel something old and dangerous wake up in my chest, something that has not stirred since I was a girl watching my mother put down a rebellion with a single word. It is anger, yes, but underneath the anger is something sharper, curiosity. And beneath the curiosity, so quiet I almost miss it, something that might be called fear, if I were the kind of person who admitted to feeling fear. I straighten my sash. "Patch him through to the negotiation chamber," I say. "Tell him the princess of the Kor line will see him personally." "Princess," Doran says quietly, stepping close so the others will not hear. "Should we not scan the station for other human vessels first? A single ship arriving with no warning, no fear, no weapons showing at all. It does not sit right with me. It feels like a door being left open on purpose." I look at him, and for a moment I consider his words seriously, because Doran has never once given me bad advice in the 6 years he has served beside me. But then I think of my mother, and my grandmother before her, and every Kor who ever stood at the edge of a negotiation table and refused to blink first. "Let them try whatever they are trying," I say. "We have 41 warships and 100,000 soldiers in this fleet. One human envoy, however strange he behaves, is not going to change that math." Doran does not argue further, but the worry does not leave his face, and something in me notes that worry and files it away, the way you file away a splinter you plan to deal with later. I walk to the negotiation chamber alone, because a Kor princess does not need an escort to face a single unarmed man. The chamber is a wide circular room with a table at its center and windows on every side that show the vast, dark shape of the station and, beyond it, the endless stars. I have negotiated surrenders in this room. I have watched planetary governors sign away their independence in this room, their hands shaking as they press their seals to the parchment. I know this room the way I know my own reflection. The doors open, and Ethan Cole walks in. He is not what I expect. I expected armor, or at least the posture of a soldier. Someone braced for violence the way every human envoy I have met before has been braced. Instead, he walks in wearing simple dark clothing with no insignia, his hands loose at his sides, his face calm in a way that unsettles me more than any weapon could. He looks, if anything, like a man arriving for a meeting he has attended 100 times before and already knows the outcome of. "Princess Kor," he says, and gives a small nod that is somehow respectful without being submissive. "Thank you for seeing me so quickly." "You did not give me much choice," I say, taking my seat at the head of the table. Arriving unannounced in the middle of my fleet is not how envoys usually introduce themselves. "No," he agrees, sitting across from me without waiting to be invited, which is either extremely rude or extremely confident, and I have not decided which yet. But I find that when time matters, formality tends to get in the way. "And why does time matter so much to you, Ethan Cole?" He tilts his head slightly, studying me the way a man studies a puzzle he already suspects he knows the answer to. "Because your fleet is here to force a tribute agreement on colonies that have done nothing to earn that kind of pressure, and because I would like to resolve this before anyone gets hurt." I almost laugh again, but this time there is less humor in it. "You would like to resolve this, you, alone, on an unarmed ship, in the middle of 41 warships." "That's right," he says, and there is no fear in his voice at all, not even the practiced kind that skilled diplomats wear like armor. It is simply absent, the way the fear of falling is absent in someone who has never once been near a great height. I lean forward, and I let a little of the old core steel show in my eyes, the look that has made governors twice his age go pale and sign whatever we asked. "Do you understand what you are looking at through that window, Ethan Cole? Do you understand what 41 warships can do to a single colony, let alone a single man?" "I understand exactly what I'm looking at," he says, and for the first time something shifts behind his calm expression, something I cannot quite name. "I think the better question is whether you understand what you're looking at." The words hang in the air between us, strange and unplaceable, and I feel that splinter Doran planted in me earlier begin to ache. I do not like riddles. I like clear lines, clear threats, clear outcomes. This man is offering me none of those things, and the not knowing sits in my stomach like a stone. "Careful," I say quietly. Words like that, spoken to a core princess inside her own fleet, have started wars before. "I'm not trying to start a war," he says. "I'm trying to stop one before it starts. Your fleet's demand, the tribute agreement, the resource quotas, the occupation rights on 3 of their moons, if you push that through, the colonies won't just resist. They'll bleed themselves out fighting a war they cannot win, and thousands of people who have nothing to do with any of this will die for nothing. I would like to offer you a different path." I study him for a long moment, this strange calm man sitting across from me like he has already won an argument I have not agreed to have. Something about his stillness reminds me of predators I have hunted on my homeworld, the ones that do not rush, that do not show their teeth until the moment they have already chosen where to bite. "And what path is that?" I ask. He almost smiles, though it does not quite reach his eyes. "A contest. 1 representative from your fleet against 1 representative from mine. If your side wins, the tribute agreement stands, and I will personally guarantee that no human ship interferes with its enforcement. If my side wins, you withdraw the fleet, and the colonies negotiate terms as equals, not as subjects." The chamber is silent, except for the low hum of the station's systems. I search his face for the trick, the hidden blade behind the offer, because in all my years as a princess of the core line, I have never once heard an opponent offer to settle a war of 41 warships with a single contest, and certainly never an opponent who seemed so entirely unbothered by the odds against him. "You want to risk everything," I say slowly, "on one fight." "I want to risk everything on one fight," he agrees. "And who represents your side? You, alone, unarmed, against whatever champion I choose from 100,000 soldiers?" "If that's what it takes," he says, And there is no bravado in it, no swagger, just a flat and terrible certainty that makes the hair on my arms rise. Yes, me. I lean back in my chair and study him for a long moment, weighing the offer the way my mother taught me to weigh every offer, looking for the angle, the hidden cost, the knife under the table. I find nothing. I find only a man who looks like he already knows how this ends, and whose calm feels less like confidence and more like a door standing open onto a room I cannot see into. Every instinct that has kept the core line in power for 6 generations tells me to refuse, to simply order my fleet to open fire and end this strange conversation before it goes any further. But something else, something curious and proud and perhaps a little reckless, wants to know what kind of man walks into the center of an enemy fleet and offers his own life as the entire stake of a negotiation. You understand, I say, that our champions do not lose. Not to humans, not ever. I understand that's what you believe, he says, and this time, the almost smile does reach his eyes, just slightly, just enough to make my pulse quicken, in a way I do not like, and cannot explain. I'm still offering the contest. I could end this now. I could call my guards, have him removed, and give the order to bombard the human colonies into signing whatever agreement I please. It would be simple. It would be safe. It would be exactly what every core before me would have done. Instead, I hear myself say the words that I will spend the rest of this day regretting, and not regretting in equal measure. Very well, Ethan Cole. You will have your contest. He nods once, as if this was never really in question, and something about the certainty in that small motion makes the stone in my stomach grow heavier. Behind me, through the wide windows of the negotiation chamber, my 41 warships hang silent and enormous against the stars, more firepower gathered in one place than most star systems will ever see. And somewhere out there, in the vast dark spaces between those ships, in corridors and cargo holds, and quiet unwatched corners of a station I thought I controlled completely, something is already moving that I do not yet know to look for. I do not know it yet, but the contest I have just agreed to is not the battle I think it is. It is not even the real battle at all. It is a curtain, drawn carefully across a stage, and behind that curtain, something far larger than a single fight is already in motion, timed to the second, waiting only for me to look the wrong way at exactly the right moment. Ethan Cole rises from his seat, gives me another of those small, respectful nods, and turns toward the door. Just before he reaches it, he pauses, and without turning back to face me, he says the words that will echo in my mind for the rest of my life. For what it's worth, Princess, I hope you'll understand, eventually, that none of this was ever really about you. Then he is gone, the doors sealing shut behind him with a soft hydraulic hiss, and I am left alone in the negotiation chamber, with my own racing heart and a growing, cold certainty that I have just agreed to something far larger and far stranger than any contest I have ever fought before. I do not know it yet, but the countdown has already begun. Doran is waiting for me the moment I step out of the negotiation chamber, his face tight with the particular kind of worry that only comes from long years of watching me make decisions he privately disagrees with. Tell me you did not agree to what I think you agreed to, he says, keeping his voice low as we walk. I agreed to a contest, I say, one champion against another. If we win, the tribute agreement stands. If we lose, we withdraw and let the colonies negotiate as equals. Doran stops walking entirely, and for a moment he simply stares at me the way a man stares at a crack spreading across ice he is standing on. Princess, you cannot be serious. You are wagering the entire outcome of this campaign, the resources, the moons, everything my grandmother's generation fought for, on a single fight against a man who arrived here alone and unarmed. He offered himself as the champion, I say, and even as I speak the words I feel again that strange unease settling in my chest. Not a soldier, not a warrior chosen for the task, himself. And that does not frighten you? Doran asks. A man who looks at 41 warships and does not flinch. A man who offers his own life as the entire stake of a war, and speaks as though he has already seen how it ends. Princess, in all my years serving your family, I have learned that the men who do not flinch at impossible odds are either fools or they know something we do not. I do not answer him immediately, because the truth is that I have been asking myself the same question since the moment Ethan Cole walked out of that chamber. I choose instead to focus on what I can control, which is choosing the right champion for the contest, someone who will end this quickly and remind the galaxy why the core line has never lost a war it chose to fight. We reach the war room, where the senior officers of my fleet are already gathered, summoned the moment word of the contest spread through the ship. I recognize every face at the table. Commander Yuval Sarn, who has led boarding actions against 3 separate rebel fleets and never once failed to bring back a victory. Captain Rhea Voss, whose gunnery skills are spoken of with something close to reverence among the younger officers, and a dozen others besides, all of them capable, all of them loyal, all of them waiting to hear who among them will be given the honor of ending this human's confidence in a single stroke. The terms are simple, I tell them, standing at the head of the table with my hands folded behind my back, the way my mother always stood when delivering orders that could not be questioned. One champion from our fleet will face the human envoy, Ethan Cole, in single combat. The arena will be prepared according to our standard protocols. If our champion wins, the tribute agreement proceeds as planned. If somehow he does not, the fleet withdraws. A murmur runs through the room, disbelief mixed with something that sounds almost like offense, as though the very idea that a single unarmed human could pose any threat at all is an insult to everyone gathered here. Princess, Commander Sarn says, stepping forward with the easy confidence of a man who has never once doubted his own strength, I would consider it an honor to represent the fleet in this contest. I have faced 100 opponents stronger and better armed than a single human envoy, and I have never lost. I study him for a moment. This broad-shouldered commander with scars across both arms from battles fought long before I was old enough to hold a weapon myself. He is exactly the kind of champion the core line has always chosen. Strong, disciplined, utterly certain of his own superiority. And yet something in me hesitates. Some quiet instinct whispering that certainty is exactly the wrong quality to bring into a fight against a man who showed none of it himself. Only a strange and terrible calm. You will represent us, I say finally, because I can think of no reasonable argument against him, and because a princess of the core line does not survive by second-guessing her own commanders in front of the entire war room. Prepare the arena. Standard combat protocols, full sensory suppression fields, gravity calibrated to our specifications. I want no surprises. Understood, Princess, Sarn says, bowing slightly before turning to issue orders to the technicians already waiting at the edges of the room. As the officers disperse to their preparations, Doran lingers beside me, his eyes following Sarn's confident stride out of the room with an expression I cannot quite read. You do not approve, I say. I approve of confidence when it is earned, Doran says carefully. I am less certain it has been earned here. Princess, may I speak plainly? You always do, I say, and it is almost a fond remark, though the tightness in my chest does not allow it to sound entirely warm. That human did not behave like a man walking into a fight he expected to lose, Doran says. He behaved like a man who had already planned 3 moves beyond the one he was making. When someone offers you a contest that seems too easy to refuse, Princess, it is worth asking why they are so eager to have you accept it. I think of Ethan Cole's calm eyes, the small respectful nod he gave before leaving the chamber, the strange words he spoke just before the doors closed between us. None of this was ever really about you. I have replayed those words a dozen times already, turning them over like a stone I cannot quite identify, and each time I find myself liking them less. What would you have me do instead? I ask. Refuse the contest and bombard the colonies outright? That would cost us more than any single fight. In resources, in time, in the goodwill of the systems we still hope to bring peacefully into the fold. The contest is the cleanest path to what we want. Perhaps, Doran says. Or perhaps it is the cleanest path to something we have not yet imagined wanting to avoid. I do not have an answer for that, and the silence between us stretches long enough that Doran eventually excuses himself to oversee the arena preparations, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the wide viewport that shows my fleet spread out against the stars, like a net cast over the dark. I spend the next hour reviewing every scrap of information we have gathered on the human ship since its arrival, and the results only deepen my unease. Our scanners have confirmed what Doran reported earlier, that the vessel shows no active weapons signature, no shield harmonics, nothing that would explain how a single unarmed craft could sit calmly in the center of a war fleet without so much as a tremor of fear passing through its hull readings. Either the ship is genuinely as helpless as it appears, which seems impossible given everything I have learned about human military doctrine over the years, or it is hiding something so completely that even our most sophisticated instruments cannot detect it. I call up the historical records on human combat encounters, searching for any precedent that might explain what I witnessed in that negotiation chamber. The reports are inconsistent in ways that trouble me more than clear defeats would. Fleet after fleet describes humans as tactically unpredictable, willing to accept losses that no rational commander should accept, and yet somehow those same fleets, when the dust settled, often found themselves worse off than before the engagement began, even in encounters recorded as victories. One particularly old report, faded and half-corrupted, describes an entire border garrison that surrendered not because it was defeated in battle, but because its command systems simply stopped obeying anyone but the humans who had, according to the report, never fired a single shot. I close the file, unsettled, and force myself to remember that this is a single envoy, not a fleet, not an invasion force. Whatever strange doctrine humanity practices in its wars, it cannot change the simple mathematics of one man facing Commander Sarn in an arena built and calibrated entirely to our advantage. And yet, when the hour comes for me to make my way to the arena, my hands are not as steady as I would like them to be. The arena itself is a wide circular chamber deep within the flagship, built specifically for contests of this kind, its walls lined with suppression field generators capable of dampening any nervous system not adapted to our specific physiology. The gravity within the chamber can be adjusted to nearly triple standard levels, enough to crush the breath from an untrained body within moments. Every detail has been calibrated, as I ordered, to give Commander Sarn every possible advantage against an opponent whose physiology we barely understand. I take my seat in the observation gallery above the arena floor, Doran settling into the chair beside me with his jaw set tight. Below us, technicians make their final adjustments to the suppression fields, and Commander Sarn stands at one end of the arena, in full combat gear, his expression calm and confident, the look of a man who has already mentally filed this contest under victories completed. At the opposite end of the arena, the doors slide open, and Ethan Cole walks in. He is wearing the same simple dark clothing he wore to our negotiation, no armor, no visible weapon, his hands still loose and easy at his sides. If he feels even the smallest flicker of fear standing across from a man built like a mountain, in a room designed specifically to break his body and mind, he does not show it. He simply walks to his mark at the edge of the arena and waits, his eyes not on Commander Sarn at all, but somewhere else entirely, somewhere beyond the walls of the arena, as though he is listening for something none of the rest of us can hear. I lean forward in my seat, my pulse quickening despite every effort to keep my composure, and beside me, Doran's hand tightens on the armrest of his chair. "Begin the contest," I say, and my voice comes out steadier than I feel. The suppression fields hum to life around the arena floor, and I watch, half expecting Ethan Cole to stumble immediately under their weight, to feel the crushing gravity close around his lungs the way it has closed around every other outsider foolish enough to challenge a core champion on our own terms. He does not stumble. He simply straightens his shoulders slightly, takes one slow breath, and turns to face Commander Sarn with the same calm, patient expression he wore in the negotiation chamber, as though the fields meant to break him are nothing more than a mild change in the weather. Across the gallery, I hear one of my officers whisper something under his breath, a prayer or a curse, I cannot tell which. Doran leans closer to me, his voice barely audible over the hum of the suppression fields. "Princess," he says, "I do not think this is going to go the way we planned." I do not answer him, because for the first time since this entire strange day began, I am beginning to fear that he might be right, and somewhere deep in my chest, beneath the anger and the pride and the stubborn certainty that has carried every corps before me through every war they ever fought, that small cold seed of doubt Doran planted earlier is finally beginning to grow roots. Commander Sarn raises his weapon, the arena lights sharpen, and the contest that I believed would settle this entire confrontation in a matter of seconds finally begins, though not, I am beginning to suspect, in the way any of us expected. Commander Sarn moves first, and he moves the way I have watched him move 100 times before, fast and precise, closing the distance between himself and Ethan Cole with the kind of controlled violence that has never once failed him against an opponent. His strike should end this. It should end this in the first 3 seconds, the way every contest I have ever authorized has ended, with our champion standing over a broken enemy while the suppression fields hum quietly overhead. Ethan Cole steps aside. It is such a small movement, almost lazy, a shift of weight and a turn of the shoulder, and yet somehow Sarn's strike passes through empty air where a human body should have been standing. The commander recovers quickly, spinning to press his advantage, but Ethan Cole is already somewhere else again, always a half step ahead, never quite where the attack expects him to be. I watch this from the gallery with my hands gripping the edge of my seat, and I notice something strange in the pattern of the human's movements. He is not fighting the way a trained warrior fights, not exactly. There is no aggression in him, no eagerness to strike back, no attempt to press whatever advantage his strange evasiveness might offer. He is simply moving, conserving effort, absorbing the shape of Sarn's attacks the way a scholar absorbs the shape of an unfamiliar language, patient and unhurried, as though the outcome of this contest matters to him far less than something else entirely. He is not trying to win, Doran murmurs beside me, his voice tight with disbelief. Princess, look at his eyes. He is not even watching Sarn. I follow Doran's gaze more closely, and my stomach turns cold as I realize he is right. In the brief moments between exchanges, when Sarn steps back to reset his stance, Ethan Cole's eyes flick upward, toward the ceiling of the arena, toward the direction of my flagship's command deck far above us, as though he is checking the position of the sun in a sky none of us can see from within these walls. Sarn attacks again, faster this time, a combination of strikes meant to overwhelm any opponent through sheer volume, and for the first time Ethan Cole does not simply evade. He blocks one strike with a forearm, absorbs the impact with a small grunt that is the first sound of effort he has made since the contest began, and steps back half a pace, resetting the distance between them with the same unhurried patience as before. He can be hurt, I say quietly, more to myself than to Doran, some small part of me almost relieved to see it, proof that whatever strangeness surrounds this man, he is still flesh and blood, still bound by the same rules the rest of us live within. Yes, Doran says slowly, but Princess, look how quickly he recovered. Sarn's strike should have staggered him, it barely moved him at all. I force myself to watch more carefully, setting aside the growing unease in my chest, in favor of pure observation, the way my mother taught me to study any opponent before deciding how to defeat them. And the longer I watch, the clearer the pattern becomes. Ethan Cole is not simply enduring the suppression fields, the crushing gravity, the physical strain of the contest itself. He is doing something far stranger. He is pacing himself the way a runner paces himself across a long distance, expending exactly as much effort as each moment requires and no more, as though he already knows precisely how long this contest needs to last, and is calibrating his every movement to that unseen clock. Sarn, meanwhile, is beginning to tire. I can see it in the slight hitch of his breathing, the way his strikes, though still fast, are losing some of their earlier precision. He has fought 100 opponents and won every time by overwhelming them quickly, by ending contests before his own stamina became a factor. He has never once needed to consider what happens if a fight stretches longer than his instincts expect, because no opponent has ever survived long enough to test that question. Ethan Cole is testing it now, deliberately, patiently, and Sarn does not seem to understand yet that the ground beneath his confidence has already begun to shift. Increase the gravity, I say suddenly, leaning forward toward the technician station below the gallery. Full suppression, I want this ended. The technician hesitates only a moment before complying, and I feel the hum of the arena's systems deepen, the air itself seeming to grow heavier as the suppression fields climb toward their maximum calibration. This is the setting we reserve for the most dangerous opponents, the ones whose physiology comes closest to matching our own combat capabilities. I have never needed to use it against a lone, unarmed envoy before, and the fact that I am using it now sits uneasily in my chest, a quiet admission that some part of me no longer believes this contest is as simple as I first assumed. Ethan Cole staggers, just slightly, as the increased weight settles over him, and for one brief moment I allow myself to hope that this will finally be enough, that the strange calm certainty in his eyes will finally crack under the pressure I have brought to bear against him. It does not crack. He simply adjusts, widening his stance, breathing more deliberately, and when Sarn presses forward to capitalize on the moment of weakness, Ethan Cole meets his next strike squarely, catching the commander's arm and using his own momentum to turn him half a step off balance, not enough to end the contest, but enough to make clear that whatever strain the increased gravity has placed on him, it has not placed nearly enough. Impossible, someone in the gallery whispers, and I do not disagree with the sentiment even as I hold my tongue. The contest continues like this for what feels like a very long time, though the chamber's chronometer tells me only a few minutes have actually passed. Sarn attacks, Ethan Cole absorbs or evades, and neither man gains the decisive advantage that would end this the way every previous contest in this arena has ended. I find myself watching not the fight itself, but Ethan Cole's eyes, which continue their strange upward glances toward the ceiling, toward the unseen command deck above us, with a frequency that has nothing to do with the rhythm of combat, and everything to do with something else, something happening beyond the walls of this arena that matters to him far more than the outcome of his own contest. Doran notices it too. I can feel him tensing beside me, his earlier warnings crystallizing into something closer to alarm. "Princess," he says quietly, "I do not think this fight is the reason he is here." I do not answer immediately, because the same suspicion has been building in my own chest for several minutes now, cold and unwelcome, refusing to be dismissed no matter how firmly I try to push it aside. Every instinct that has ever served me well tells me that something is deeply wrong with this entire encounter, that the contest unfolding below us, however strange, however unprecedented, is not actually the true center of whatever is happening today. "Pull up the fleet's internal security logs," I say to the nearest technician, my voice sharper than I intend. "All decks, all systems. I want to know if anything unusual has occurred since that ship arrived." The technician nods and begins pulling up screens of data, scrolling through logs faster than I can properly read them, searching for whatever anomaly might be hiding beneath the surface of this strange, patient contest still unfolding on the arena floor below us. Below, Sarn launches another combination of strikes, faster and more desperate now, the first true crack of frustration showing in his usually composed expression as he begins to understand, on some instinctive level, that this fight is not going the way any fight in his career has ever gone before. Ethan Cole absorbs the assault with the same patient calm as every exchange before it, and for just a moment, as he steps back to reset the distance between them, his eyes meet mine directly across the gallery, holding my gaze for a heartbeat longer than seems accidental. There is no malice in his expression, no triumph, no cruelty, nothing that would explain the strange chill that runs through me at that single shared glance. There is only a quiet, patient certainty, the look of a man watching a clock he trusts completely, waiting for a moment he already knows is coming. "Princess," the technician at the security station says suddenly, his voice tight with alarm, "I am showing an anomaly in the auxiliary command corridor. Unauthorized access attempt. Deck 7, Section 12. My blood runs cold. Deck 7, Section 12 is less than 50 meters from the flagship's primary command core, the heart of every system that controls my entire fleet's coordination, from weapons targeting to shield harmonics to the very engines that allow 41 warships to move and fight as a single unified force." "Lock it down," I order, rising from my seat so quickly that Doran has to catch my arm to steady me. "Full lockdown. All decks, immediately." "Attempting now, Princess," the technician says, his fingers flying across his console, but the lockdown commands are not responding. Something is already inside the system, blocking our... He does not finish the sentence, because at that exact moment every screen on the gallery flickers simultaneously, a wave of static passing across every display in the chamber before settling into a new configuration, one none of us authorized, one none of us can immediately explain. Below, on the arena floor, Ethan Cole finally stops moving entirely, lowering his hands to his sides and stepping back from Commander Sarn with an expression that is almost, impossibly, apologetic. "I think," he says quietly, his voice carrying clearly up into the stunned silence of the gallery, "that's probably about enough time." And in that moment, staring down at a man who has just fought my finest commander to a standstill without ever once trying to win, watching my own security screens rewrite themselves under a hand that is not mine, I finally understand, with a cold and terrible clarity, that Doran was right from the very beginning. This contest was never the battle at all. For a long moment, nobody in the gallery moves. Commander Sarn stands frozen on the arena floor, his chest heaving from exertion, staring at Ethan Cole with an expression that has finally shifted from confidence into something closer to confusion. Below us, the suppression fields continue humming at their maximum setting, utterly wasted now that the fight itself has simply stopped, both combatants standing at a strange and unspoken truce that neither of them declared aloud. "Reactivate the lockdown," I snap at the technician, my voice sharper than I intend, fear beginning to cut through the layers of pride and disbelief that have kept me calm until this moment. Now, whatever is happening on Deck 7, I want it stopped immediately. "I am trying, Princess," the technician says, and there is real panic in his voice now, the professional calm of a trained officer finally cracking under the weight of something none of his training prepared him to face. "The command core is not responding to my authorization codes. It is as though the system no longer recognizes me as a valid user." "That is not possible," I say, even as every instinct in me insists that it is happening anyway, right now, on my own flagship, in the heart of my own command structure. Those authorization protocols were built by the finest engineers in 3-star systems. They cannot simply stop recognizing legitimate commands. "They are not supposed to be able to," the technician says. "But Princess, I am watching it happen. Whoever is inside the system is not breaking through our defenses. They are simply being let in, as though they already had permission, as though they have had permission for far longer than any of us realized." Doran's hand tightens on my arm again, and when I turn to look at him, his face has gone the pale gray color it only takes on in moments of genuine crisis, a color I have seen perhaps 3 times in the 6 years he has served beside me. "Princess," he says quietly, "I think we need to consider the possibility that this was never a spontaneous infiltration. I think someone has been preparing this for a very long time, quietly, patiently, waiting for exactly this moment. I think of every human ship my fleet has encountered over the past several months, every trade vessel we allowed to dock at our supply stations, every diplomatic courier we permitted to move freely through our territory, under the assumption that individual, unarmed humans posed no meaningful threat to a fleet of our size and strength. I think of every crew member, every technician, every low-ranking officer who has come and gone through the flagship's decks over these long weeks of preparation for this campaign, and a cold, sick feeling begins to spread through my chest as I realize how many opportunities we unknowingly offered to whoever has been quietly building toward this moment. "Show me the security footage from Deck 7, I order. I want to see exactly who is responsible for this." The technician pulls up the footage, and for a moment, the screen simply shows static, the recording corrupted or deliberately erased. Then, slowly, an image resolves, grainy and incomplete, showing a narrow service corridor near the command core, empty except for a single figure moving with quiet, practiced efficiency between access panels, working with the calm, unhurried confidence of someone who has walked this exact path many times before and knows precisely where every camera, every sensor, every security measure lies, and precisely how to avoid them all. The figure is human, slight build, dark clothing similar to what Ethan Cole wore into the negotiation chamber, movements economical and unhurried in exactly the same way his were during the contest below us. For one wild moment I wonder if it is somehow him, if he has found some impossible way to be in two places within my flagship simultaneously, before rational thought reasserts itself and I understand the far more disturbing truth. There are two of them, at least two, perhaps more. Who is that? I demand. How long has this person been aboard my ship? I do not know, Princess, the technician says, his hands still moving frantically across his console. I am cross-referencing crew manifests, supply logs, everything I can access, but the records themselves appear to have been altered. According to our own systems, no unauthorized personnel have ever been aboard this vessel. Whoever this is, they have been erasing their own presence from our logs as they moved, which means they have had access to falsify our own security records, Doran finishes grimly, which means they have had far deeper access to this ship's systems than any single infiltration attempt could achieve in a single day. I stare at the frozen image on the screen, this quiet, unremarkable figure moving through the heart of my flagship's most secure systems, as though they belonged there, and I feel the full weight of what Doran is suggesting settle over me, like the crushing gravity of the arena below. This was not a plan born this morning, or even this week. This was a plan set in motion long before my fleet ever arrived at this station, long before Ethan Cole ever walked into my negotiation chamber and offered his strange, impossible contest. Below us, on the arena floor, Ethan Cole is still standing quietly across from Commander Sarn, making no move to attack, no move to flee, simply waiting with the patient calm of a man who already knows exactly how the next several minutes are going to unfold. I realize, with a fresh wave of cold understanding, that he has known this entire time. Every glance toward the ceiling, every carefully measured exchange of strikes, every moment he spent absorbing Sarn's attacks rather than trying to win outright, all of it was calculated to hold my attention, to hold the attention of my entire command staff, focused on a contest that was never meant to determine anything at all. He was the distraction, I say aloud, the words tasting bitter and strange in my mouth. This entire time, the contest, the negotiation, even his arrival, alone, unarmed, provoking exactly the kind of confident overreaction any core princess would offer. All of it was designed to keep my attention exactly where he wanted it, on him, on this arena, while the true operation unfolded somewhere I was not watching. Princess, the technician says, his voice tight with dread, I am now showing multiple unauthorized access points across several decks, not just Deck 7. Engineering, weapons control, navigation. It is spreading faster than I can track it. Cut power to those systems, I order. Manually, if the automated controls will not respond. I do not care what it costs us in efficiency. I want those systems isolated before whoever is doing this gains complete control. I am trying, Princess, but the manual overrides are not responding either. It is as though the entire command architecture has already been restructured beneath us, and we are simply the last ones to notice the walls have moved. I close my eyes for one brief moment, forcing myself to breathe, to think clearly, despite the panic clawing at the edges of my composure. My mother's voice echoes in my memory, a lesson from childhood I have not needed to recall in years. Akor does not panic when the ground shifts beneath her feet. Akor finds the nearest solid stone and stands upon it, however small, however temporary, and builds outward from there. Doran, I say, opening my eyes and turning to face him directly, I need you to take a security detail and physically secure the command core. Cut it off from the rest of the ship's network entirely if you have to. Manual controls only, no automated systems we cannot personally verify. Yes, Princess, Doran says, already moving toward the door, and then he pauses, looking back at me with an expression I have rarely seen on his face before, something close to genuine fear, tempered by absolute loyalty. And what will you do? I look back down at the arena floor, at Ethan Cole standing calm and patient across from a commander who no longer seems to know quite what he is looking at, and I feel that old core steel rise up in my chest once more, tempered now by something new, something that tastes almost like respect mixed in with the fury and the fear. I am going to go ask him exactly what he thinks he has accomplished here, I say, before I decide whether to have him executed or whether there is anything left of this campaign worth salvaging. Doran does not look reassured by this answer, but he does not argue either, simply nodding once before hurrying from the gallery with his security detail falling in behind him. I take one last look at the screens still flickering with the slow, patient spread of unauthorized access across my flagship's most critical systems, and I understand, with a certainty that settles cold and final in my chest, that whatever Ethan Cole and his unseen companion are doing to my fleet, it is already far too advanced to simply be stopped by cutting a few cables or locking a few doors. The nightmare that will follow humanity's warships across the stars for generations to come, the one that will make every commander in every fleet in this sector think twice before dismissing a lone, unarmed human vessel ever again, is not beginning in some distant battle I have not yet witnessed. It is beginning right now, quietly, patiently, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, in corridors I cannot see, on decks I no longer control, while I stood in a gallery above an arena and watched exactly what I was meant to watch. While I stood in that gallery watching a contest designed to hold my gaze exactly where it was wanted, a woman named Lucy Marsh had already been quietly working inside my flagship for 11 days. I would not learn her name until much later, when the full shape of what had happened finally became clear to me, but in this moment, while Sarn and Ethan Cole stood motionless on the arena floor below the gallery, Lucy Marsh was 3 decks below the command core, seated cross-legged on the floor of a maintenance corridor she had claimed as her own quiet workspace, her fingers moving across a small interface device with the same patient, unhurried rhythm as breathing. She had come aboard disguised as part of a maintenance crew contracted through a neutral trading consortium, one of dozens of independent workers my logistics officers had approved without a second thought during the fleet's resupply stop 3 weeks earlier. Nobody had questioned her credentials, because her credentials were, in every technical sense, real. Humanity had spent months building the identity she wore, layer upon layer of legitimate work history and verified certifications, until Lucy Marsh, the maintenance technician, was, on paper, exactly as unremarkable as every other contractor who passed through our supply lines. The truth, of course, was very different. Lucy Marsh had spent those 11 days doing exactly what her cover identity suggested, performing minor repairs, filing routine reports, behaving in every visible way like precisely the person she appeared to be. But beneath that patient, unremarkable surface, she had been quietly mapping the entire architecture of my flagship's command systems, learning not just where the important connections lived, but how they thought, how they responded to different kinds of requests, which systems trusted which other systems without question, and which quiet, overlooked pathways led from the maintenance networks she had legitimate access to, all the way up into the beating heart of my ship's control structure. She did not attack anything. She did not need to. An attack would have triggered alarms, would have drawn attention, would have ended her mission in the first hour, rather than allowing it to unfold across 11 patient days. Instead, she simply asked, quietly, politely, in the language every automated system understood, whether she might be allowed just a little more access than her role technically required, framing each request as a routine efficiency measure, a minor convenience that would make her assigned repairs marginally faster to complete. And because every request was small, because every request seemed reasonable in isolation, my own systems granted them one after another, never noticing that each small permission was another stone laid quietly into a bridge that would eventually span the entire distance between the outer maintenance networks and the flagship's most secure command core. By the time Ethan Cole walked into my negotiation chamber and offered his strange contest, Lucy Marsh's bridge was already nearly complete. She needed only one thing more, a window of sustained distraction long enough to make the final connections without triggering the kind of urgent, focused security response that might have noticed what was happening, even through her careful, patient work. Not to determine the fate of a tribute agreement, not even, in truth, to prove anything about human combat capability at all. The contest existed for one purpose only, to occupy the full attention of a princess and her command staff for exactly as long as it took a quiet woman 3 decks below to finish what she had spent 11 patient days building. I would learn later, from Ethan Cole himself, that the two of them had trained together for this exact kind of operation for years before ever setting foot near this sector, that Lucy Marsh's calm, unhurried infiltration and his own calm, unhurried performance in the arena were two halves of a single carefully rehearsed plan, each one useless without the other, each one designed to make the fleet watching believe it was witnessing something far simpler than the truth. While I stood frozen in the gallery, watching my own security screens rewrite themselves beneath commands I no longer controlled, Lucy Marsh made her final connection, a quiet, almost gentle request routed through 17 separate systems until it reached the flagship's central coordination array, the single point through which every one of my 41 warships received their orders, synchronized their movements, and trusted absolutely that any command originating from this vessel carried the full authority of the core line itself. She did not seize control through force. She simply asked, in exactly the right way, through exactly the right pathway, and the system, trusting the long chain of small legitimate permissions that had led to this moment, answered the only way it knew how. It said yes. I did not understand any of this in the moment it was happening, of course. I understood only that my screens were flickering with unfamiliar configurations, that my technician's voice was climbing steadily toward panic, that somewhere in the vast dark spaces of my own flagship, a stranger's hand had reached in and taken hold of something I had believed, until this very hour, belonged entirely and unquestionably to me. I left the gallery at a near run, my sash trailing behind me, my mind racing through every possible response, even as some quieter, colder part of me already understood that whatever was happening had likely already succeeded before I ever took my first step toward the command core. I passed officers in the corridors whose faces mirrored the same dawning horror I felt in my own chest, whispered reports flying between them faster than any formal channel could carry, rumors already outpacing the truth in the way rumors always do during moments of genuine crisis. By the time I reached the outer approach to the command core, Doran was already there with his security detail, and the look on his face told me everything I needed to know before he spoke a single word. "Princess," he said quietly, stepping aside so I could see past him, into the wide, humming chamber beyond. "I do not think there is anything left here for us to secure." I stepped past him into the command core, the heart of my entire flagship, the room from which every one of my 41 warships had, until this very hour, received their orders and drawn their sense of unified purpose. The great central display that normally showed the tactical positioning of my entire fleet now showed something else entirely, a slow, steady cascade of authorization confirmations, one after another, each one representing a single ship, acknowledging a new chain of command that neither Doran nor I had ever authorized. "How many?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How many ships have already confirmed?" The senior technician at the primary console did not turn to look at me, his eyes fixed on the screen with the particular kind of horror that comes from watching something happen that you know, with absolute certainty, you are powerless to stop. "All of them, Princess," he said, "all 41. I stood very still in the center of my own command core, surrounded by the quiet hum of systems that no longer answered to me, and somewhere far above, in an arena I had left behind without a backward glance, a man named Ethan Cole was still standing calm and patient across from Commander Sarn, waiting, I understood now with perfect and terrible clarity, for exactly this moment to arrive. The nightmare the galaxy would soon whisper about in hushed, fearful tones had not required a single shot fired, not a single hull breached, not a single soldier wounded beyond the bruises Sarn himself had earned in a fight he never truly needed to win. It had required only patience and 11 quiet days, and a princess who had been so certain of her own strength that she never once thought to ask what an unarmed ship, sitting calmly in the center of her fleet, might actually be waiting for. Word spreads through a flagship faster than any official announcement ever could, and by the time I had gathered myself enough to leave the command core, every officer aboard my ship already understood, in broad outline if not in exact detail, that something had gone catastrophically wrong. I could see it in the way conversations died the moment I passed, in the way eyes dropped rather than met mine, in the particular hush that falls over a crew when they realize the person they have always trusted to lead them through crisis is, for the first time, just as lost as they are. I returned to the arena gallery to find Commander Sarn already there, no longer in his combat gear, standing near the edge of the observation window, with his shoulders set in a way that told me he had already heard the news, and was waiting, with something between dread and resignation, for me to arrive and confirm it. "Princess," he said, "is it true? Has the fleet actually—" "Yes," I said, because there was no gentler way to say it, and because a princess of the core line does not hide difficult truths from the officers who serve her, however much easier it might be in the moment. Every ship in the fleet has confirmed a new chain of command authorization. We do not yet know how deep the change runs, whether it affects weapon systems, navigation, life support, or simply the administrative layers we can see on the surface. Doran's team is still working to determine the full extent of it. Sarn's jaw tightened, and I could see the shame working through him, the particular kind of shame that comes from a warrior who has spent his entire career believing himself unbeatable, only to discover that the true threat to everything he protected was never standing in front of him with a weapon at all. "I fought him for nearly 10 minutes, Princess, and I never once suspected. He gave me nothing to suspect. Every strike I landed, he absorbed exactly as much as he needed to, and no more. I thought I was testing his limits. I understand now that he was simply waiting, and I was the clock he was counting against." "We were all the clock," I said quietly. "That is precisely the point. He did not need to defeat you, Commander. He only needed to keep you fighting long enough." Below us, in the arena itself, Ethan Cole stood exactly where he had been standing when the contest effectively ended, hands loose at his sides, patient as ever, making no attempt to flee or hide, or celebrate whatever victory his people had achieved. When I finally descended to the arena floor myself, my guards falling into position around me out of habit, rather than any real belief that they could protect me from whatever had already been done, he simply watched me approach with the same calm, unhurried attention he had shown from the very first moment we met. "You could have simply told me," I said, stopping a few paces away from him, my voice tighter than I intended. "In the negotiation chamber, you could have told me exactly what you were capable of, and let me decide whether to risk this outcome with my eyes open." "Would you have believed me?" he asked, and there was no cruelty in the question, only genuine curiosity, as though he had considered this exact possibility himself and already suspected the answer. I thought of the confidence I had carried into that negotiation chamber, the absolute certainty that 41 warships and 100,000 soldiers could not possibly be threatened by a single unarmed man, and I felt the truth of his question settle uncomfortably in my chest. "No," I admitted, "I would not have believed you. I would have assumed it was a bluff, a piece of theater meant to unsettle me before the true negotiation began. That's the trouble with overwhelming strength," Ethan Cole said, not unkindly. "It makes belief very difficult, right up until the moment belief is no longer optional." "And now?" I asked, gesturing around us at the arena, at the ship, at everything that had, in the span of a single strange afternoon, slipped entirely out of my control. "What happens now? Do you strip my fleet apart while I stand here and watch? Do you turn our own weapons against us, or against the very colonies you claim to be protecting? You have taken everything, Ethan Cole. What is left for me to do but ask what you intend to do with it?" For the first time since our first meeting, something like genuine warmth crossed his expression, quiet and unhurried, the same way everything about him seemed to move. "Nothing so dramatic, Princess. We do not want your ships. We do not want your soldiers, or your resources, or your territory. We wanted exactly what I told you we wanted in that negotiation chamber, a guarantee that the tribute agreement would not be forced on colonies who never agreed to it, and a demonstration, clear enough that it would not need repeating, that overwhelming force is not the same thing as actual safety." "A demonstration," I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. "You took control of an entire war fleet to prove a point." "I took control of an entire war fleet," he said, "to prove that taking control was possible, and then chose not to use that control for anything beyond ensuring this particular conflict ends here, quietly, without further loss on either side. The authorization changes your technicians are seeing right now are not permanent seizures, Princess. They are temporary holds, designed to expire on their own within the day, once we are confident the tribute agreement has been formally withdrawn and the colonies have been given the chance to negotiate as equals rather than as subjects. I stared at him, searching his face for the trick I still could not quite believe was absent, the hidden cruelty that surely must exist somewhere beneath this calm, patient exterior. I found none of it. I found only a man who seemed, impossibly, almost tired, the particular exhaustion of someone who has just finished doing something difficult and unpleasant, not because he wanted to, but because he believed it was the only way to prevent something far worse. You could have destroyed us, I said slowly, every ship in my fleet, disarmed, disabled, at your mercy, and you are simply going to hand control back and let us leave. That was always the plan, he said. Force does not need to be met with equal or greater force to be answered, Princess. Sometimes it only needs to be met with patience and precision and the willingness to prove a point without needing to make anyone bleed to prove it. Around us, my officers stood in stunned silence, watching this exchange unfold with expressions I could not fully read, relief mixed with humiliation, gratitude mixed with something that might, in time, become respect, though none of us were ready to name it that yet. Doran arrived at the edge of the arena just in time to hear the last of Ethan Cole's words, and I watched something shift in his expression too, the tight worry of the past hour easing, just slightly, into something more thoughtful. Why tell us any of this? I asked. Why not simply vanish the moment your work was done, and let us discover the truth of it on our own? Because the point was never to humiliate you, Princess, Ethan Cole said. The point was to make sure this never needs to happen again, not to your fleet, not to any fleet that might be considering the same kind of tribute demand against people who have done nothing to deserve it. That lesson only holds if you understand exactly what happened here, and why, and what it means going forward. I looked past him, toward the wide viewport at the edge of the arena that showed, faint and distant, the vast dark shape of my 41 warships still holding their formation against the stars, no longer entirely mine, in the way I had believed them to be that morning, though soon, if his word could be trusted, they would be again. Something in me, some old and stubborn core pride, wanted desperately to be angry, to demand retribution, to insist that this humiliation could not simply be allowed to stand unanswered. But a larger, quieter part of me, the part that had spent the last hour watching my own certainty crumble piece by piece, understood that anger would accomplish nothing here except perhaps ensuring that the next lesson humanity felt compelled to teach my people would be far less gentle than this one had been. The tribute agreement is withdrawn, I said finally, the words heavy but not, I found, as bitter as I expected them to taste. The colonies will negotiate as equals. You have my word as a core, which I do not give lightly and have never once broken. I believe you, Ethan Cole said, and something in the simple sincerity of it struck me more deeply than any of the strange, patient calm he had shown throughout this entire encounter. For what it's worth, Princess, I don't think you're a cruel person. I think you're someone who was taught that strength alone was enough to keep her people safe, and today was simply the first time anyone showed you that isn't quite true. I did not have an answer for that, not one I was ready to speak aloud, and so I simply nodded once, the small formal acknowledgement my mother taught me to offer when a difficult truth had been spoken and no argument remained worth making. Around us, the authorization screens throughout my flagship continued their slow countdown toward returning control to hands that had, until this morning, never once doubted their right to hold it, and somewhere in the vast quiet spaces between my ships and his single small unarmed vessel, the shape of an entirely new understanding was beginning, however reluctantly, to take root. My name is Ethan Cole, and I have spent most of my career doing the kind of work that never shows up in official histories, the quiet kind, the kind that ends wars before anyone gets the chance to write songs about the battles that never happened. I did not enjoy standing across from Commander Sarn in that arena, absorbing strikes I could have avoided entirely if avoiding them had been the point. He was a skilled fighter, disciplined and honorable in the way soldiers raised on certainty tend to be, and every blow I let land was a blow I chose to take rather than one I could not stop, a small price paid willingly to keep his attention exactly where the mission required it to stay. I have learned, over years of operations like this one, that the hardest part is rarely the physical strain. The hardest part is standing still while someone attacks you, absorbing what you must, and trusting completely that the person working quietly somewhere else entirely is doing exactly what she promised she would do, on exactly the timeline she promised to do it. Lucy Marsh has been my partner in operations like this one for nearly 6 years now, and I have never once had reason to doubt her precision. When I finally made my way down to the maintenance corridor where she had spent 11 patient days building the bridge that would ultimately hold an entire war fleet's chain of command in her open palm, I found her exactly where I expected to find her, calm and unhurried, already beginning the slow process of writing the authorization changes back to normal, exactly as we had planned from the very beginning. "You cut it close," she said, not looking up from her interface as I settled onto the floor across from her. "I needed almost the full window." "I noticed," I said, rubbing at the bruise already forming along my forearm, where Sarn's last real strike had landed. "Sarn is better than the report suggested." I had to work harder than I expected to keep him convinced I was actually fighting him. "You always say that," Lucy said, a small smile finally crossing her face as she glanced up at me. "And you always come back looking like you actually fought them. Would you rather I looked untouched?" That would have raised more questions than it answered. She laughed quietly at that, the first real sound of relief either of us had allowed ourselves since the operation began, and for a moment we simply sat together in the humming quiet of the maintenance corridor, two people who had just quietly reshaped the outcome of a war without a single life lost on either side, letting the tension of the last several hours finally begin to drain away. I think often about what Princess Vela Kaur said to me in that arena, the anger and confusion tangled together beneath her careful composure, the honest question of why we had chosen to reveal ourselves at all, rather than simply vanishing once the work was done. I meant what I told her. The lesson only holds if the people who need to learn it actually understand what happened and why. A fleet that simply finds itself mysteriously disarmed, with no explanation offered, learns only fear and resentment, the kind of lesson that breeds retaliation rather than reflection. But a fleet whose leader stands in an arena and watches, with her own eyes, exactly how patience and precision can accomplish more than 41 warships ever could, learns something far more valuable and far more likely to last. Humanity did not send me and Lucy Marsh into that sector because we wanted a war. We sent ourselves because we understood, long before Velacor's fleet ever arrived at that station, that the tribute agreement she carried would have crushed 3 colonies that had done nothing to deserve it, and that no amount of diplomatic protest through official channels would have stopped a princess who had never once been given reason to doubt the effectiveness of overwhelming force. Sometimes the only way to teach that lesson is to become, however briefly, the thing that force cannot overcome, quietly, without bloodshed, in a way precise enough to leave no ambiguity about what almost happened and how easily it could happen again. I do not know yet whether Velacore will remember this day as a humiliation to be avenged, or as the beginning of something wiser than the path she was walking before we arrived. I suspect, from the way she looked at me in that final conversation, from the quiet, thoughtful weight in her voice when she gave her word about the tribute agreement, that it might genuinely be the second of those 2 possibilities, though only time will tell for certain. People raised on certainty do not always abandon it easily, even when that certainty has just been proven false in front of their entire command staff. What I do know is this: the galaxy has spent generations underestimating humanity, measuring us against standards built for species who settle their conflicts through raw power and overwhelming numbers, never quite understanding that we learned, long before we ever reached the stars, that the quietest victories are often the ones that last the longest. A single warship, arriving without warning, asking politely for a meeting, offering an impossible contest with a smile and a calm voice, is not a small thing to those who understand what it actually represents. It is a promise, carried across every star system we visit, that overwhelming force will always meet something it did not expect, something patient, something precise, something that would rather end a war quietly than win one loudly. That is the nightmare the galaxy has begun to whisper about in hushed voices across 100 star systems, not a fleet of warships descending with fire and fury, but the quiet, unremarkable arrival of a single unmarked vessel, carrying nothing more threatening than patience and the willingness to wait exactly as long as it takes. Velacor's fleet left that station 3 days later, formation intact, every ship's command authority fully restored, exactly as I promised her it would be. The tribute agreement was formally withdrawn before she departed, signed and sealed with her own hand, and word reached us through quiet channels not long after that the colonies she once threatened have already begun negotiating new terms with her envoys, terms built on something closer to genuine partnership than subjugation. I like to think that somewhere in that exchange, in the careful, respectful way her officers now speak of the encounter, something real has begun to shift, not just for her fleet, but for the sector as a whole. Lucy Marsh and I will likely never see her again. Not directly. Our kind of work rarely allows for reunions or lasting connections with the people whose lives we quietly redirect. But I carry the memory of that final exchange with me anyway, the moment a princess who had never once doubted her own strength looked at me with something that was not quite anger and not quite gratitude, but perhaps the beginning of genuine understanding. She told me she was not a cruel person. I believed her then, and I believe it still. She was simply someone who had never been shown, until that day, that strength without wisdom is not nearly as safe as it feels from the inside of an unbroken fleet. I hope, wherever she is now, that the lesson holds. I hope the next fleet that considers crushing a colony that never asked for a fight remembers her story, remembers the day a single unmarked ship arrived and, without firing a single shot, without breaking a single bone that did not choose to be broken, quietly proved that the galaxy's oldest assumption about strength had always been wrong. We do not need 41 warships to change the outcome of a war. We only need one quiet ship, one patient woman working unnoticed in a maintenance corridor, and one man willing to stand still and take exactly as many hits as it takes to keep the right eyes looking in the wrong direction, for exactly as long as it takes to finish the work that matters. That is how the nightmare begins, and it is also, if we have done our work well, how it ends.